if you think this game is just about money, you've lost at the very first move. In a world where every number glows on the electronic board, where a furrowed brow on Wall Street can shake villages in Bangladesh, and where wealth is taken as a universal destination, have you ever stopped? Truly stopped to ask whose game the money game really is, and for what purpose? Lemon Game is not an investment guide, nor is it a financial technical manual. It is an introspective diary disguised as an economic essay, a strange concoction of philosophical reflection, financial comedy, and stark, honest confessions. Here, you won't find strategies to beat the market, but you might just find yourself in the guise of an investor who is passionate, bewildered, sometimes foolish, but always profound. And so the question is no longer how to win, but whether you are playing a game whose rules you truly understand. And if not, why do you still sit at that table every day? Part 1: The Anxiety of Money. The world is not always what people unconsciously tell you. We all understand that, especially if you grew up in a place like America, where everything is marinated in advertising, and even advertising disguised as truth. A little girl watching TV might ask if it's true that using Listerine mouthwash will get her the lead role in the spring play. And her kind mother would say, "No, dear, that's just an advertisement." But sooner or later, children realize that even parents have their own advertisements, empty promises to make them quiet, eat fast, sleep well. And then parents, in turn, become victims of another chain of advertising, the reassurances of the government, the press, the market. All cleverly staged to make us believe that everything is fine, until the skeptics begin to quietly hoard silver from the treasury, driving prices sky high, while the rest of the crowd still waits to be cast in the lead role. This book, if you haven't run away yet, is a mixture of image and reality, identity and insecurity, money and madness. No, not exactly dry philosophy, but it's not a beginner's guide to getting rich either. I am not Adam Smith, the scholar resting in Canongate Cemetery since 1790, who called himself a moral philosopher before becoming the father of liberal economics. But that name, purely by chance, gave me a perfect mask to infiltrate a place where no one wants to reveal the truth. You see, Wall Street is a different world. Information isn't in newspapers. It's in whispers at the bar, in the broker's eyes when the market crashes, in a 9:23 a.m. phone call from someone you thought had retired. Those who truly understand Wall Street rarely write about it, because if they knew enough to write, they'd be smart enough to keep quiet and get rich. And if they did write, it would only be anonymous stories, like 19th century bankers signing as Cato Sen or Ragastis, attacking each other with pens sharp as knives. When I started writing stories about Wall Street under the name Adam Smith, I never expected to open such a rich mine. Every character I created, Paul Graham, Johnson, or anyone else, was filled with details by readers. His hair isn't blonde, it's brown. He doesn't have $25 million, he has $33 million. He doesn't drive a Jaguar, he drives a Rolls. Everyone recognized themselves, or someone very much like them, in the stories I only hinted at with a few strokes of the pen. And then, amidst glasses of wine and trading floors, amidst rumors and electronic boards, I stumbled upon a quote from John Maynard Keynes, and it struck me like lightning. The game of professional investment is intolerably boring to anyone who is not in the least a gambler, whilst to anyone who is a gambler it is a fitting penalty. Wait, Keynes called it a asterisk game, asterisk, not a profession, a job, or a career in macro investment, but a asterisk game, asterisk as in the dictionary. A game, recreation, contest, play, competition for a prize. And I began to see Wall Street as a card game where no one knows all the rules. A place where smart guys in tweed jackets with Excel spreadsheets aren't necessarily the winners. Sometimes, the winner is someone who knows when to dance with the crowd, or when to stand still while the whole crowd is dancing chaotically. The market is not just a place to make money, it's a mirror where you can see yourself in your rawest state. If you can't stand losing, you'll lose everything. If you want to be loved for your stock picks, the market will abandon you when you need it most. And if you don't know who you are, Wall Street will be an extremely expensive place to find out. I've met people like that. The young girl with sparkling eyes clutching her ComSat stock like a firstborn child. She didn't know how much ComSat made, but every time a satellite launched, she felt it was asterisk her asterisk baby. Or like Edward, who inherited a fortune in Avon stock, but only found happiness when he personally picked a different stock and persuaded others to buy it. For him, joy wasn't in the money, but in being recognized as a visionary. Then there's Arthur, who only felt comfortable when a stock went down, because when it rose too quickly, he panicked and blamed himself for not buying more. It was a strange kind of pleasure being punished by losses as if it were a fitting penalty for some invisible mistake in the past. And I wondered, do we invest to make a profit or to play a role? A winner, a sacrificial lamb, a martyr in the chaotic crowd. You see, no analytical system, whether valuation, random, or mathematical model, can explain the behavior of someone trying to prove to their deceased father that they are worthy. Or a man emerging from a divorce who wants to prove to himself that he's still worth $1 million. Or an old woman who hoarded IBM stock across 3 generations as if it were a family treasure, though she never sold a single share and still lived as if she had nothing. Wall Street, beneath its veneer of logic and data, is essentially a psychological theater where everyone comes not just to make money, but to seek something deeper. A definition of self, a role in the play called financial life. I once wondered if the market was truly a crowd. What's so special about a crowd? If you've ever gotten lost in a Moroccan market, crammed into a rock concert, or stood in the middle of Fifth Avenue on sale day, you'll notice something strange. Once you merge into a crowd, you are no longer yourself. You become part of a larger body, a strange organism with its own pulse, its own hunger, its own fears. And the market, more than anywhere else, is the perfect crowd. It has no face, yet it has the power to make the most sober person irrational. You start the day with a plan, a strategy, a reason to believe in ABC stock. But then ABC drops 5 points. No reason, no bad news, just a drop. And you start listening. Is ABC not doing well? Insider trading? Are people selling? You start to sweat. Sell, hold, buy more, and you forget that just this morning you believed in ABC like a religion. The crowd doesn't need a reason to move. And when the investing crowd moves, it carries your identity, your confidence, your rationality with it. You are no longer you. You are a leaf floating downstream. But there's an even stranger truth, you know? Even the very concept of money isn't as real as you think. You think money is material, power, freedom. No. On Wall Street, money is trust, a dogma, an illusion that many people collectively agree upon. If everyone woke up tomorrow morning and collectively decided that the dollar was worthless, it would indeed be worthless. You could hold it in your hand, but it would buy you nothing. And those who play the money game understand this better than anyone. They don't believe in money as a stable entity. They only believe in its movement. They ride the wave of trust and flee before the tide recedes. And in their minds, money is not the destination, but a signal, like the market's breath, like the crowd's heartbeat. Everyone in the market has their own reasons. I ask them, why do you play the stock market? To make money, and then I'll have freedom. Freedom to do what? Freedom not to play the stock market anymore. How ridiculous. We rush into this game, hoping one day not to play it anymore. But the answer that haunted me most came from a 60-year-old broker who had seen every market rise and fall for 30 years. He sat contemplating his screen and said, I play because I'm afraid. I asked, afraid of what? He said, afraid of having nothing to be afraid of. It's a strange statement and profoundly true for some people. Insecurity is fuel. If the world were peaceful, they wouldn't know what to live for. If everything stood still, they'd have no reason to wake up each morning. And that's where identity, what defines you, collides with the market. The market doesn't care who you are. It doesn't know if you're smart, hardworking, ethical, or a good father. It only cares how much money you put on the table and how much pain you're willing to endure. The insecurity in investing comes from wanting to be recognized as right. You buy a stock and hope the market confirms you're a genius if it rises. You're a hero. If it falls, you feel like a failure. But the market doesn't care. It has no eyes, no ears. It's a machine driven by collective emotion, and it crushes both hope and pride equally. I once witnessed a man smash an old ticker machine just because it gave a bad price for 2 minutes. Not because he lost money, but because he felt insulted, as if the machine was mocking him. You see, when money gets entangled with the ego, everything becomes insane: identity, insecurity, and money. These 3 elements don't just coexist. They dissolve into each other, forming a strange solution we call investor psychology. And if you've never stood before a blazing red screen, hands trembling, unsure whether to cut losses or ride profits, you haven't truly understood this game. But the strangest thing is that some people love that feeling, like a form of adrenaline. They don't play to win, they play to feel, to know they're alive, to vibrate like a string when the market changes tone. And so you have an entire society of people who don't know who they are, trying to find their identity through numbers dancing on a screen. They don't need money to live. They need money to know they're worth living. I once thought perhaps we all carry a silent yearning to be loved for our intelligence, especially in investing, where a correct decision not only brings money but also a silent affirmation. I am someone who sees what others don't. And so when you invest, you're not just picking a stock. You're writing a love letter to yourself, hoping the market will reply by raising that stock's price. Imagine a man, I'll call him Harold. Harold is a cautious fund manager, excellent at analysis, and deeply loves his daughter. He picked COS, a fictional stock, or perhaps a misspelling of a known one like Co-Corp, very early and doubled his account. But what made him happiest wasn't the profit, but his ex-wife calling and saying, "I heard you did well." For a moment, financial success opened a crack, an opportunity to be recognized, forgiven, seen. Or think about the young woman I met, who held Comsat stock like a mother holding her infant. She understood nothing of return on investment or business models. She only knew that every time Comsat was mentioned, her heart pounded as if her child was performing. And when the stock price fell, she didn't sell. She was just silently sad, as if a child had done something wrong. You might think such people are emotional, irrational. Be careful, because a part of that exists in all of us. You say you buy stocks because of a low PE, because of strong cash flow. Try to recall the times you didn't cut losses because it will recover, or when you hesitated to buy because of a bad feeling. Logic is the mask. Beneath it is a tangle of raw emotions never named. And then there are people like Edward, who not only wanted to make money but wanted others to follow him, to prove he was a leader. For Edward, investing was a performance. Money wasn't enough, an audience was what he craved. The market became a stage, each person an actor, a genius, a fallen hero, a sage who withdrew at the right time, or a martyr for his belief in oil stocks. And as in every play, what matters isn't truth, but the feeling asterisk of truth. And you'll see stories like Arthur, who only felt safe when losing. He would panic when a stock rose too quickly, as if he didn't deserve such luck. He punished himself by selling early, then felt compelled to re-enter the market to lose again. A form of addiction to failure, where punishment is proof that he still exists, still feels. We might laugh, but it's the laugh of recognition. Because in each of us, there's a Harold, an Arthur, tiny fragments of the soul that always crave validation, love, to be seen through dancing numbers. And I realize something. The more a person ties their identity to the value of their investment portfolio, the more vulnerable they become. The market doesn't love you, it doesn't hate you, it doesn't know you exist. But you give it power like a strict father, a cold mother, or a lover who left. And then you wait, anxious, hurt by an entity that never intended to hurt you. That's why the market is addictive, not because of money, but because it's the most honest mirror reflecting your inner self. There you cannot pretend. You'll know how afraid you are, how fragile you are, how much you want to be acknowledged. And the moment the market turns its back, you'll feel rejected by your own parents. So, investing isn't about making a profit. It's a journey of self-acceptance, of forgiving yourself. And if you're lucky, you'll learn to let go of the need to always be right, to truly start living, instead of just living through numbers. I was asked, so what exactly is asterisk money? The answer always baffles people, because money, which seems the most concrete, is actually the most abstract. No one eats money, wears money, or shelters in money. Money is a symbol, a contract, a social agreement that this thing has value, as long as everyone believes in it. And like all symbols, money easily becomes a metaphor. For one person, it's power. For another, it's security. Some see money as a reward for effort. Others see it as a prerequisite for being loved. Money becomes a mirror reflecting all suppressed expectations, unnamed desires, unacknowledged fears. Think of the middle-aged man, I'll call him Samuel. He didn't spend money, didn't travel, didn't party. He spent his life accumulating blue-chip stocks like IBM and General Motors, never selling. Why? Because for him, each share was a brick in the invisible fortress he had built since childhood, where poverty gnawed at his memories. Every time the stock price rose a little, it was a new coat of paint on that wall of memory. He didn't need to spend money. He needed to know that if the worst happened, he would never fall back to the bottom he once knew. Or like Mary Harris, an old woman living in a small apartment in Queens, wearing old clothes, eating canned soup. No one would have guessed she owned over $1 million in Johnson & Johnson stock, inherited from her husband. She never sold, not because she was waiting for the price to rise, but because those shares were the last remnant of the man she loved. To sell them would be to let him go. And when I asked if she ever thought of using that money to travel or live more comfortably, she just shook her head. As long as I keep them, I'm still a part of him. And I realized that money can be the language of memory, of unspoken love, of unnamed fears. And in the market, when we exchange shares, we don't just exchange assets. We exchange identity, self-preservation, complex psychological layers like a spiderweb. I used to think I was detached, rational, unburdened by those emotional games. I used to believe that I told stories and others lived them. But then I started to see myself in the stories I thought were just research material. I also hesitated when I should have sold. I also felt foolish when I chose wrong. I also gloated when the market confirmed I was right. I also longed for a call saying, "Your article was brilliant." And I understood that I was no different from them, except that I knew how to use words and called it all by more flowery names. But the truth remains the same. Money is a test. It doesn't make you someone else. It only magnifies who you truly are. If you're inherently anxious, you'll be doubly anxious with money. If you inherently need control, you'll go crazy when the market goes against your predictions. If you're inherently afraid of being left behind, you'll hold on to stocks until rock bottom just to avoid feeling defeated. And if you don't know who you are, the market will make you discover it not through words, but through loss. Through the moment you see your account evaporate. Through the emptiness when a stock soars and you sold too early. Through the look you give yourself in the mirror after a failed bet. Wall Street, ultimately, isn't a place to prove anything. It's a place to learn to stop seeking external validation. A place to learn to let go of the need to always be right. A place to realize that you are not your portfolio. You are something deeper, and sometimes you only discover that when everything is lost. Part 2, the system on Wall Street. People always crave a system, a method, a secret formula. Because if there was something like the market's source code, the first one to decipher it would wield absolute power. Not political power, not military power, but the strangest power, the power to know what hasn't happened yet. That's why, very early on, people tried to find footprints in the sand, signs indicating where the market was headed. They called it technical analysis, then cycle analysis, then Elliott wave analysis, then Ichimoku clouds, and the name doesn't matter. What matters is the belief. If you stare long enough at the chart, you'll see the truth. I once sat with a man named Henry. He was the type who believed in everything, as long as it had a diagram. Henry had a chart printed from 1910 with hand-drawn curves and ink notes like an improvisational jazz score. He pointed to a spot. This was the 1929 peak. See, looks just like the current peak, doesn't it? I asked. What about macroeconomic factors? He shrugged. It's all in the chart. And I realized that for Henry, the chart wasn't just a tool, it was scripture. But does the chart tell the truth, or is it just a flat mirror reflecting what we want to see? Another group believed in cycles. Everything repeats, they said, like people who believe in destiny. I met someone who analyzed the market according to the moon phases. He had data on new moons, full moons, and how they affected investor sentiment. You might think it's a joke. He had clients, and they paid real money. Then came the computer enthusiasts. They believed that with enough data and processing power, you could simulate the market like a video game. They wrote code, built models, ran backtests. And when a model was right for 6 months, they started to believe they were God. I once met a guy like that. I'll call him Victor. Victor had a system with 37 indicators. Each indicator had its own set of rules. I asked, "Do you ever change the system?" He replied, "The system adapts itself." And when I asked, "What if the market changes its behavior?" He laughed, "I have machine learning." The problem is, machine learning doesn't learn fear. It doesn't learn the feeling of your heart pounding when you make a real bet. It doesn't understand the irrationality of human behavior, like when someone sells off a stock not because of bad news, but because they just got divorced. Systems only work if the world is logical, but the market, where humans make decisions, is a symphony of contradictions, instincts, expectations, and illusions. And when the most beautiful model meets the ugliest reality, the model doesn't win. I don't deny systems, I just doubt absolute belief in them, because if you cling too tightly to a system, you'll stop seeing reality. You'll become a devout follower, and the market, like a capricious deity, dislikes overly pious followers. I once asked a veteran technical analyst, "Do you ever change your system?" He laughed. "The system is never wrong, only the person is wrong." I thought to myself, if that's the case, how do you know if the system is right and the person is wrong, or if the person is right and the system is wrong? The answer is no one knows. But humans always want to believe in something, because without a system, the world becomes too chaotic. And in that chaos, fear abounds, so we cling to models, to signals, to probabilities, like clinging to a life raft in the middle of the ocean. I once heard someone say the market is random, and that sentence stopped me cold, as if someone had just said that love is the result of dopamine molecules. If the market is random, it means all the analyses, all the models, all the trend lines, all the Elliott wave theories are illusions. It means the winners are simply the lucky ones. So, the efforts of millions of people analyzing, forecasting, studying for years just to bet on a coin toss. The idea of a random walk, that stock prices move randomly like a drunkard, isn't new, but it's always unsettling because it wounds the ego. It tells us that you are not special, you are not better than the market, you are just another person picking up rocks in the desert and thinking you've found gold. Those who believe in the random walk are often academics, not because they are naive, but because they understand that data doesn't lie. They analyze hundreds of thousands of trading sessions and find that no one wins forever. Every edge erodes over time. Every strategy is adapted by the market, and ultimately, everything comes back to probability. The best story about this comes from a mathematician. He recounted, "Imagine 1,000,000 monkeys. Each one tosses a coin every day, choosing to buy or sell a stock. After 250 days, there will be about 1,000 monkeys who have won consistently for 250 sessions. And you know what? People will interview those monkeys, write books about them, and call them investment geniuses." That idea infuriates people. But what's wrong with it? If you can't distinguish a genius from a monkey based solely on short-term results, then perhaps the problem isn't with the monkeys. And that's why people try even harder to systematize. If the market is random, then use machines to crack that randomness. And so, computers rose. They have no emotions, no panic, no greed-only data, logic, and speed. I once walked into a trading room filled only with the sound of keyboards clicking and the glow of screens. There, trading models were activated in microseconds. If CZ stock rose 3% within 40 seconds after oil prices rose 1%, the model would order a buy. No one in the room actually made decisions. Everything was programmed. If the model was right, money flowed in. If wrong, the model was adjusted. They called it quantitative trading, and the people behind it were often PhDs in physics, mathematics, or engineering from MIT. They didn't care about the company's product or what the CEO said on CNBC. They only cared about patterns, probabilities, the ability to anticipate market reactions before they occurred. The question is, does it work? Yes, but not forever. Because models, like bacteria, thrive when the environment is stable, but when the environment changes, crisis, war, a presidential tweet, the models die first. Because they don't know fear, and not knowing fear is the most dangerous thing in the market. I once saw a model go crazy for a week in 1970. It sold a stock because an indicator was too sensitive, then bought back double because of unusual data. In 5 days, it made the fund lose nearly 30%. And the irony was, no one could blame it because it was right according to the model. The market was wrong, the model was still perfect. And that's the most dangerous part of systems, when humans cede judgment to machines, and machines cede consequences to reality. Every system, whether mechanical, mathematical, or spiritual, has one fatal flaw: they make humans stop thinking. When you believe in a system long enough, you start to see it as a form of truth, and like all believers, you will find every way to protect your faith, even when reality shatters into fragments. I once sat with a group called Multidimensional System Analysts. They used market data from 1926 combined with numerology and the cycles of Saturn to predict the market. I jokingly asked, "Do you also need to predict the weather that day?" One responded seriously, "We don't believe in randomness." And that's precisely the problem. When you don't accept randomness, you start to see meaning in every fluctuation. A stock price dropping 2% must have a reason. A short-term indicator reversing is certainly a sign. Like those who read tea leaves to predict the future, you will see shapes, numbers, graphs that you want to believe. But the market has no meaning. It only has movement. And forcing meaning into every movement is the behavior of someone panicking. Individual investors often get lost in a labyrinth of data. They buy a thick book full of formulas, memorize indicators, then hope that with enough knowledge they will never lose. But the market doesn't reward diligence. It rewards correctness and punishes error, even if the person has a PhD. And the problem is, sometimes you're right but still lose. Because the market isn't a laboratory. It's a maelstrom where probability, emotion, herd behavior, and a touch of madness combine. If you don't understand that, you'll drown, no matter how many theoretical books you carry. I once saw someone draw dozens of support and resistance lines, Fibonacci, Bing-castic, on the same chart, looking like a cosmic map. I asked, "What do you see here?" He replied, "I see the market is at a decisive stage." I asked, "When is it not at a decisive stage?" He fell silent. Humans have an innate need to find patterns, to find order in chaos. That's why we look up at the sky and see constellations instead of scattered points of light. And that's also why we look at charts and see head and shoulders, cup and handles, ascending triangles as if the market were an abstract artist painting with intent. But the market isn't trying to paint anything. It is we, in our fear and hope, who create the images. And once we believe in them, we act according to them. From then on, the image becomes reality, not because it's true, but because enough people believe it. This is the greatest paradox. A system can be right, not because it's accurate, but because it's believed. If enough people believe in a support level of 4,000 points, the market will stop there, even if no one knows why. That's the magic of collective belief. But what happens when belief shatters, when data is betrayed, when the chart doesn't follow the script? That's when you see your true self. No more system, no more indicators, only instinct in you. As a fearful creature, you will either act or flee, go bankrupt or awaken. I once saw a wealthy investor withdraw all his money from the market just because the Dow Jones closed at 88 points. "I don't like 3 identical numbers," he said. I thought he was joking, but his eyes weren't smiling. And I understood. In an uncertain world, people will cling to anything that seems to have order, even superstition. That's why some people don't buy stocks priced at $13, fearing the unlucky number. Some only trade on a full moon. Some believe that if you wear a blue striped shirt on Tuesday, the market will rise. And you laugh. Be careful, because you might also be waiting for a September tsunami, or the Santa Claus rally, or the Black October phenomenon, as if they were mathematical theorems. And that's where the system turns into religion, when it's no longer a decision-making tool, but a spiritual refuge where you seek certainty not from logic, but from faith. People often quote numbers as if they speak for themselves. The market's PE is 16.4. So what? Is 16.4 better than 18 or worse than 14? Who decides what number is normal? History. But history never repeats itself exactly, it only echoes. And the danger is that when you believe in numbers, you start to see people as numbers. You ignore context, motivation, emotion. You look at a company as a data stream instead of a community of people trying to build something meaningful. I once asked a friend who worked at a hedge fund, "When do you sell a stock?" He replied, "When the numbers don't match." I asked again, "Don't match what?" He answered, "The model." I asked, "What if the model is wrong?" He laughed, "Then I change the model." And that's the vicious cycle. If the market doesn't match the system, we don't fix our perception of the market, we fix the model. And if the model is wrong again, we make a new, more complex model, with more variables, more magic, until the system becomes a labyrinth, and we are the minotaur, unable to find our way out. So are systems useless? No, they help us stay disciplined, avoid impulsive emotions, and provide a framework when everything is chaotic. But systems are not truth, they are maps, not the territory. And if you cling too tightly to the map, you'll no longer see the forest. You'll miss the drying stream, the dying tree, or the newly opened path. You'll follow the drawn line, even if it leads you to a cliff. So if I have any advice, it's this: use systems like a pair of glasses, not like handcuffs. Know that no system is eternal, and remember that in a world where everyone is trying to predict, the person humbly admitting they know nothing might be the only one who still sees clearly. Part 3: The Pros. If you've ever thought that Wall Street professionals understand the market better than you, you're not wrong, but you're not entirely right either. They understand it differently than you, not because they possess superior intellect, but because they live in it, breathe with it, and sometimes are swallowed whole by it. There's one thing you'll learn very quickly if you work closely with professional investors: not everyone plays to win. Some play to survive, some play to maintain their position, some play to impress, and only a few play to stop playing. Because they know the longer the game goes on, the higher the cost. Look at what I call the cult of performance. There's no place for second best. No one cares why you were wrong or how you justified yourself. There's only the leaderboard, the metrics, and a single upward sloping line. A successful fund manager isn't necessarily the one who makes the most money, but the one who isn't fired for 6 consecutive quarters. Because when you manage other people's money, you face not only the market, but also expectations, investment committees, and wealthy clients calling at 6 a.m. asking why their favorite stock was sold. I once had lunch with Jack Swift, a classic fund manager who could order a $10 million stock purchase with a mere frown. He wasn't intellectually brilliant. He was shrewd like an old cat who could smell blood from afar. During lunch, he pointed to the menu and said, "People buy stocks like choosing a steak. Everyone wants it delicious, affordable, served quickly, and without a stomach ache afterward." Then he laughed. "The only difference is, stocks aren't like steak. They're like airport sushi, always a risk of bacteria." Jack understood one thing well: most professionals aren't investors, they're performers. They manage expectations, client emotions, and their image. And if they make a profit, it's a consequence, not the goal. Imagine a fund manager who invests in CZ stock and it drops 10%. Clients call furious. What should he say? "This is a long-term strategy. The market might be overreacting. Our analysis team still believes in its potential." But what if, at the same time, other managers are all selling CZ and buying something else? What will he do if he doesn't buy? He'll fall behind. And in the world of benchmarks, the worst thing isn't losing money, but losing less than others. That's the relative mindset. If the market drops 10% and you only drop 8%, you're a hero. If the market rises 12% and you only rise 10%, you're useless. So professionals don't just invest according to signals, they invest according to their colleagues, according to trends, according to the mood of the professional crowd. And that's what's frightening. If the people considered the smartest are also caught up in herd mentality, who is left to be rational? I once witnessed a silent tragedy unfold at a large investment fund. The main character was Vincent, a promising analyst, an honors economics graduate, neat brown hair, firm voice, and Excel spreadsheets always open on 3 screens at once. He had been chosen to rise through the ranks, to become one of the youngest portfolio managers in the fund's history. When assigned a portfolio, Vincent breathed as if each stock was oxygen. He studied every financial report, spoke with company management, attended roadshows, checked models down to every decimal point. And then he picked the first stock for his portfolio, a chemical company just lauded by Fortune magazine as the opportunity of the century. That stock dropped 20% in 2 weeks, for no apparent reason, just market panic after an unexpected inflation report. And Vincent, once expected to be the golden boy, suddenly became the focus of cold stares in the conference room. He didn't cut losses because his model was still right, because the company itself hadn't deteriorated, and because deep down he wanted to be proven right. The price was not just money, but reputation, career, and the most terrible thing in the world of professional investing: losing faith in himself. I never saw Vincent again after that year. People said he moved to teach at a university. Perhaps because there, they don't judge you by last month's profit chart. But Vincent wasn't the only case. I've seen experienced managers like Charles, who made millions from acquisitions, but then one day, when market trends changed, all the old strategies stopped working. Charles tried to adapt, but the more he struggled, the deeper he sank. He didn't understand why the market no longer reacted as before, why investors chose different paths with the same information. He became cynical, then panicked. Finally, he withdrew, not because he ran out of money, but because he no longer recognized himself in the mirror each morning. At a higher level, I've heard strange stories about investment superstars, people admired by every financial newspaper, coveted speakers at conferences. But behind the glamour was a damp and shadowy truth: the pressure to always be right, to always win, to always maintain an image. One of them, I'll call him MJ, had a streak of 11 consecutive quarters of positive returns. In the 12th quarter, the market went into a deep correction. He knew he should cut positions, but he didn't. Because if he cut, it meant admitting he was wrong, meant ending his record streak, meant possibly losing six-figure speaking contracts. And he held his positions. The market continued to fall. As a result, he not only lost money but was also investigated. Because when the mind trembles, it's easy to slip across the line between legality and recklessness. That's what professionals rarely talk about. The higher you go, the greater the cost of a mistake. So they often have to choose between living authentically or performing well, and most choose the latter. That's why many professionals start looking for shields, seemingly objective systems to blame. The model recommended it this way. Credit rating agencies rated it this way. Historical data shows a high probability. And so, they hide in a technocratic shell where responsibility is fragmented and conscience is padded with beautiful charts. But I once met someone different. He was an old man sitting at the end of the office row, almost unnoticed. No pretense, no dramatics, never appeared in the news. But for 20 years, he made money consistently. I asked his secret. He looked at me, a slight frown on his face. I have no secret. I just remember that I can be wrong at any time. And when I'm wrong, I want to survive long enough to correct it. That's not in any textbook, not on any investment conference slide, but it's the most precious thing: humility in the face of chaos. If there's one skill that every Wall Street professional craves so much they'd trade mental peace for it, it's the ability to asterisk time asterisk. Choose the right moment. You can be right about the stock, right about the model, right about all the fundamental factors. But if you're wrong on timing, you still lose. And in the world of investing, being wrong early is as bad as being wrong late. Because the market doesn't reward correctness, it rewards correctness at the right time asterisk. I once witnessed an investor make a huge bet on energy stocks in 1970 before the oil crisis erupted. In theory, it was a genius decision. But the market didn't rise immediately. For 6 months, his stocks just languished, even dropping slightly. Clients lost patience. The investment committee questioned him. He was forced to reduce his position. Right in the week before the stock broke out, others jumped in and captured a 40% gain. He quietly tidied up his portfolio, watching the market run away. I call that the Galileo syndrome. Those who see the future are often burned before they are recognized. And it is precisely because of this obsession with timing that many professionals begin to engage in strange games where they feel they can control time. One of the most peculiar examples is the cocoa market. Cocoa, the sweet ingredient of chocolate, seems like a harmless commodity. But for speculators, it's a brutal playground no less fierce than the stock market. Its price is influenced by the climate of Ivory Coast, politics in Ghana, and even unusual rains in Nigeria. But the most fascinating thing is that this market is small, meaning a single large player can make prices swing wildly. I once knew a group of investors who formed a cocoa club. Every morning, they gathered like chess players. They analyzed satellite images of soil moisture, surveyed rainforest rainfall, listened to local radio stations from Africa, and made decisions as if placing bets in a casino. The only difference was, they were confident they weren't gambling. They thought they were calculating probabilities. But one day, an unseasonal storm ruined all calculations. Cocoa prices didn't rise as predicted but fell sharply. Margin calls poured in, and the weather strategists realized that no system could predict pure unpredictability. That story isn't just about cocoa. It's a microcosm of all of Wall Street, where the smartest people try to turn chaos into logic and fail. So why do they keep going? Because they have no other choice. It's the only game they know how to play, and if they don't play, they don't know who they are. One professional investor once told me, "We don't do this for the money, we do it for the feeling." I asked, "What feeling?" he replied. "The feeling of reading the market correctly, like solving an ancient puzzle." And I understood. For him, money was just the punctuation mark at the end of the sentence. What he was addicted to was the process of deciphering. And so, professionals, those expected to be the most rational, also act on instinct, fear, and ego. They just hide them better, wrapping them in models, reports, and flowery jargon. They are the ones who rewrite the reasons after every decision, who piece logic to actions already taken, who always find a way to make failure seem like part of the strategy. There's a cruel irony that the longer you work on Wall Street, the clearer you realize. Sometimes, the professionals themselves are the most confused about who they are. They understand the market, grasp the data, speak fluently, even have the ability to make you believe they know the future. But deep inside, they often live in anxiety, under pressure to maintain an image, and in an unnamed the fear of being exposed. You can't blame them. The environment taught them that way. In the professional world, you're not allowed to say, "I don't know." An analyst cannot present to a board and say, "I feel like something is wrong, but I don't know why." Feelings aren't quantified, intuition isn't accepted. So they learn to say the opposite, to speak with certainty when in doubt, to speak coherently when confused, and to speak at length to cover up what they don't know. One investor shared with me that in an environment where everyone is measured by quarterly performance, caution can seem like a revolutionary act. He wasn't joking. If you're too cautious, you'll be seen as indecisive. If you act differently from the crowd, you're considered eccentric. And if you're wrong when acting alone, you're hanged. But if you're wrong with the crowd, you're forgiven. That's Wall Street logic. Better to lose together than win alone. So professionals tend to act in sync, not because they're stupid, but because they understand that survival is more important than being right. And to survive in a world that measures every percentage point, you have to do everything not to fall out of step. That's also why sometimes I see amateurs, unconstrained by reputation or organizational structure, act more correctly. Because they're not pressured to pretend they know what's going to happen. They dare to stand aside when the market is too hot. They dare to hold cash when they don't see opportunities. They don't need to beat the market every quarter. They just need to preserve capital and maintain their sanity. I once asked an old man living in rural Connecticut, who had been investing independently since the 1950s, how he saw himself differently from today's young professionals. He simply said, "I have no one to prove myself to." And in that statement was an entire world. While professionals strain to maintain their positions, to appear on leaderboards, to retain large clients, that old man only needed one thing: peace of mind and not losing money. He didn't need to win, he just needed not to lose in a battle no one was forced to join. This doesn't mean every professional is dishonest and every amateur is wise. But there's a truth few are willing to admit. The deeper you understand the market, the more you realize how little you control. And that humility, not degrees or reputation, is the foundation of long-term survival. In this game, the better a professional becomes, the more easily they get caught up in expectations. While the amateur, if sober enough not to be tempted by speed and glamour, can find a more sustainable path. Part 4, the doomsday scenario. There's a silent obsession that always lurks in the hearts of professional money players, even the richest, most data-driven, most confident ones. What happens if everything collapses? What if the entire system, the market we breathe every day, is actually a sandcastle just waiting for a tsunami? I'm not talking about 10% corrections or a bad earnings season. I'm talking about a financial apocalypse scenario where currencies lose value, banks close, and central bank phone lines become meaningless. And it was in that gloomy state of mind that I met a strange friend. I called him the Dwarf of Zurich, with both respect and jest. He was a Swiss financial expert fluent in 6 languages, small in stature but with eyes sharp as knives. In a cafe thick with the smell of anxiety in Geneva, he told me without emotion, "A global monetary crisis is inevitable." I asked him why. He just smiled, then pulled a stack of papers from his coat, not charts, not data, but copies of world monetary history over the past 300 years, from Law's banknotes in France to Germany's Papiermark during the Weimar era, from the peso crisis to the devaluation of the British pound. "Look at the past," he said. "Every major economy eventually makes the same mistake. Thinking they can print unlimited credit, thinking complexity can replace sustainability, and forgetting that money, at its core, is trust, not a tool. He wasn't the only one worried. On Wall Street, there's a small but very real faction of people who believe in a doomsday scenario. They buy gold, silver, land far from the city, and own guns. They don't believe in the Fed, don't believe in the government. They believe that one day everything will collapse, not with bombs and bullets, but through internal erosion. I once saw a major asset manager shift a portion of his portfolio into raw diamonds stored in a safe deposit box in Liechtenstein. His reason: when the financial system collapses, he won't want to explain his assets to anyone. That feeling that everything is clinging to an intricate but fragile network isn't new. But lately, it's become clearer. Global public debt is rising. Central banks have become the main financiers of governments. Currencies are manipulated as political tools, and everyone closes their eyes because no one wants to be the first to leave the party. We live in a system where every dollar is not earned, but generated from keyboard strokes, a button press, and $700 billion appears. You call it liquidity support. The dwarf of Zurich calls it black magic. I asked him, "So what's the solution?" He replied, "There is no solution, only limits. And when the system exceeds its limits, it will correct itself through pain." I started to notice small signals, seemingly random, but hinting at something deeper cracking. For example, the strange disappearance of the half-dollar coin, a phenomenon that baffled many. But to those sensitive to monetary disorder, it was like the first sound in a landslide. It started like this. Some collectors and bank tellers noticed that silver half-dollars issued before 1965 began to disappear from circulation. People quietly kept them. There were young people collecting silver from change at laundromats, old men opening shoe boxes looking for old coins. They didn't clearly explain why. They just knew one thing: real silver had value, paper money didn't. You might consider that antiquated superstition. But if a society begins to hoard silver, it means they are doubting the sustainability of the official currency. They don't believe in what's printed on paper. They believe in what can be held, melted, exchanged in an apocalypse. I asked a gold and silver shop owner why people were hoarding half-dollars. He looked at me, shrugged, and said, "Because no one believes in the new anymore." People still say the US dollar is safe, that it's the ultimate refuge, that the whole world still uses it. But trust is the most fragile thing when you start to question why you believe it. Because the government says so, because everyone else believes so, or because you have no other choice. This anxiety is no longer confined to speculators. It seeps into central bank meetings, where people debate prolonged zero interest rates, large-scale asset purchases, and how free money is distorting every fundamental principle. People like the dwarf of Zurich call it a countdown clock. Every supportive policy is a turn of the clock hand, every injection of money is another tick-tock, and no one knows when the final talk will come. The market, meanwhile, behaves as if there's no tomorrow. People buy tech stocks with no revenue. People borrow money to buy real estate for the third time. Indices rise not because of expectation, but because of fear of missing out. And while investors laugh, the quiet ones start building bunkers in the woods. This isn't ordinary fear. This is a vague feeling that the foundations are shaking, that everything asterisk seems asterisk to be working, but underneath, gears are grinding, cables are rotting, and then there will be a jolt, a shock, and everything will fall. That's why professional investors are starting to do something they rarely did before. Asking each other if they should hold a little gold, not as an investment, but for self-preservation. I remember one evening at a financial party where wine flowed like a river and jazz music was soft as velvet. A gray-haired fund manager leaned close and whispered, "I don't know what's coming, but I no longer believe the numbers on the dashboard." That's when I understood. When insiders no longer believe in the system they operate, perhaps the fateful moment is not far off. The fragility of the modern financial system doesn't come from obvious weakness, but from what seems to be the opposite: its excessively smooth operation. It's like a bridge spanning a chasm, reinforced by collective belief. Each of us drives across it every day, not because it's truly solid, but because everyone else is driving too. And because no one stops, the bridge still stands. But what happens if one person, just one, decides to pull over and ask, "Is this bridge really sturdy?" That's what defines the chaotic nature of a crisis. It doesn't come from bad information, it comes from a loss of faith. And faith is immeasurable. It evaporates without warning, without rules, without predictable patterns. And when it dissolves, it spreads like electricity through salt water. You can see this in every crisis. 1929, 1973, 2008. Everything was fine. Until no one believed anymore that everything was fine. And it was that lack of belief, not a specific event, that was the trigger. People started selling because they saw others selling. Banks tightened credit because they saw other banks tightening credit. Prices fell because prices fell. There's a conversation I'll never forget between two major fund managers at a dinner party. One said, "We know it's a bubble." The other replied, "Of course we do, but we can't get out before the crowd." The first nodded, sipping his wine, "Because if you get out early, clients will leave." Then he said, softly but sharp as a knife, "And if you get out late, we'll all die together. At least someone will die with us." That cold logic, better to die together than live alone, is at the core of almost every crisis. Because withdrawing money early is anomalous behavior, while holding on is consensual behavior. And in an environment where survival is linked to not looking foolish, most people choose to hold on. But the market doesn't reward consensus, it punishes delay. And often the first punishment is light. Just a correction, just a small bank going bankrupt, just a company defaulting on its bonds. But like a sign of cancer, once it appears, the whole body has been infected for a long time. A conservative economist once wrote, "Modern financial systems operate like airplanes that are 99.9% safe. But when they crash, it's rarely a slight bump." And that's why the vision of a financial apocalypse haunts so many people. Because when it comes, it doesn't give you time to adapt. It arrives with suddenness, with speed, with the strange silence of failed clicks, of unexplained red text, of frozen transactions, and unanswered calls. A manager invited me to see his company's emergency plan. In a basement room with no Wi-Fi, no windows, no phone signal, there was a manual control board, paper maps, satellite phones, and written records of asset data. I asked, "Do you think you'll need to use it?" He looked at me, unblinking. "I don't think so, I just don't rule it out." And that's the important thing. A system is only stable until the first person starts preparing for it to no longer be stable. And when many people prepare, the outcome is no longer a hypothesis. It becomes a question of when, rather than if. I used to think that when the collapse came, it would be a rage of nature, a resounding explosion, blazing red boards, the frantic screams of investors, chaotic lines of people withdrawing money from banks. But no, if you've ever lived through a real financial crisis, you'll know that collapse isn't noisy. It's cold, it's silent, it's quiet like a frozen lake on a winter night until the ice breaks and everything slips away. First, a slight anomaly, a delayed transaction. A client asks, "Why hasn't my account updated?" Then a rumor spreads, "CZ Bank has liquidity problems." Someone calls someone else to verify, no answer. No one says anything definitive, only looks. And then the calls begin, not to ask but to act, transfer accounts, withdraw cash, sell all bonds. And by the time the crowd realizes, the door has closed. In those moments, truth no longer matters, only feeling. Whoever feels insecure first, acts first. Whoever waits until they know for sure, it's already too late. The market doesn't operate by reason, it operates by reflex. I remember a seasoned fund manager friend telling me when Lehman Bros collapsed, everyone was waiting for the Fed to say something, but what I feared most was if they didn't say anything. And the Fed did speak, but their words couldn't extinguish the smoldering fire, because once trust cracks, every announcement only shatters it faster. The irony is that the most powerful people in the system are often the most paralyzed when a crisis occurs. They are bound by regulations, by politics, by public expectations. They cannot act like a shrewd individual speculator quietly withdrawing. They must stay on stage, even as the stage collapses. And that's when people are revealed for who they truly are. Not as financial experts, but as inherently fragile beings. They pray, they panic, they draw up rosy scenarios just to keep their spirits from breaking. They begin to believe in utopian solutions, vague bailout plans, quantitative easing as tranquilizers. But deep down, they know no one can control the wave once it's higher than the roof. So is there a way out? The dwarf of Zurich once told me, all financial systems have one thing in common, they don't last forever. But people continue to live, continue to trade, exchange, establish new orders. I asked, "What do you believe in after the system collapses?" he replied slowly. I believe in the ability of regeneration, not of institutions, but of human beings. And perhaps that is the only thing left when the dust settles. The instinct for survival, the ability to adapt, the acceptance that all order is temporary and all chaos contains the seeds of a new order. Even in a system that seems as solid as steel, the important thing is not to run fast, but to look closely, to listen to the small gasps, the changes in the market's breathing, the signals from the periphery. Because often, when the center begins to crack, everything has long since started in places you weren't paying attention to. Part 5, The Millennium's Vision. Try asking anyone, do you want to be rich? Most will answer yes, without thinking. But if you ask again, do you truly want that with all the consequences, with all the changes in your life, in your mind, in how others see you? Then perhaps the answer won't come so easily. Becoming rich, truly rich, isn't about adding a few zeros to your account. It's an identity swap, letting go of a part of yourself, your peace, your privacy, your simplicity in exchange for a new position on the social chessboard, where everything is redefined. I've met people who achieved financial freedom very early. They sold their companies, they made big investments, they won the game that others were still struggling to start. But then, just a few months later, they began to feel lost. Not because they lost money, but because they no longer had a reason to wake up each morning. A friend told me after selling his startup for $200 million, I thought afterward I'd have time to read books, walk, plant flowers, but now I just feel invisible. Another, richer, stated bluntly, being rich didn't make me happier. It just gave me more expensive options to feel empty. And that's the paradox. We rush into the market, enduring stress, pressure, sleepless nights, for something that once achieved doesn't solve the initial causes of our suffering. In this part, I'm not giving you a formula for getting rich. I'm not showing you how to invest smarter, faster. I'm just inviting you to pause for a moment to ask why you want to be rich. Perhaps you want security, but how much money is enough for you to no longer be afraid? Perhaps you want freedom, but are you sure you know what to do with that freedom? Perhaps you want recognition, but are you sure that recognition comes from the numbers in your wallet or from something deeper? We often imagine the rich as people who own houses, cars, stocks, land. But there's another kind of wealth, harder to see but just as real, the wealth of being able to let go. I once knew a man who could buy any car but chose to bike to work every day. He said, "The fewer things I have to hold on to, the less I feel held hostage." True wealth may not lie in control, but in not being controlled by the desire for mastery itself. And at a deeper level, the real question is, if money no longer holds its former meaning, if everything you need is readily available, then who are you? Very few people are willing to confront that question, so they keep running, earning more, investing more, not because they need to, but because they're afraid to stop. Afraid that when they stop, they'll find they have nothing left but a list of completed goals and a still empty soul. I once sat across from a man who had just sold his tech company for nearly $500 million. He had everything society calls success: money, power, respect. But in his eyes, I saw not relief but emptiness. "I won," he said, "but I don't know what I won." That wasn't the statement of someone feigning humility. It was the sigh of a person who had just finished a long race and suddenly realized there was nothing at the finish line. No fireworks, no music, just an eerily quiet space and the unanswered question, what's next? This is a state many wealthy people experience silently, discreetly. No one dares to speak it aloud, because you're not allowed to complain when you're successful. Society doesn't accept that. You have to smile, show off yacht pictures, pretend to be happy. And so they live in a prolonged pretense until they themselves are no longer sure what's real. Another person, once a renowned investor, told me that after he had enough money, he found he didn't need to be smart anymore, didn't need to be sharp, didn't need to monitor the market, didn't need to argue with anyone. He could be wrong and still live comfortably. And that, which sounds like freedom, was for him a form of collapse. "I'm no longer me," he said. "I don't need to be anyone." Money can buy many things, but it can't buy purpose, it can't buy meaning, it can't buy the feeling that you're working towards something. And when you no longer have a goal to strive for, you start asking very old, very primal questions. Who am I? What am I here for? I once met a mysterious wealthy man who never appeared in the news. No one knew how much he owned. He lived reclusively on a farm in Vermont, reading philosophy books and tending his garden. I asked why he left the market. He replied, "Because the market always asked me, 'What do you want?' And I couldn't answer." I was speechless because in that inability to answer lies the entire nature of the journey to wealth. You think you're looking for money, but in reality, you're looking for an answer. But perhaps the question itself is the most valuable thing, because if you can sit in silence, unhurried by the fear of scarcity, unpushed by the desire for excess, and truly ask yourself, "What do I want?" then you are rich in a sense few have ever touched. I am not against wealth. I have personally seen money save loved ones, transform entire families, open up possibilities that were previously impossible. But I have also seen money turn a good person into a madman, a talented person into a cynic, a dreamer into a control addict. So if you ask me if you should want to be rich, I will answer, yes, but don't just want it. Want inner freedom, clarity of thought, and the humility to know that sometimes the important question is not how much, but why. The ideal rich person, if they exist, is not the one who earns the most, but the one least manipulated by money. They don't measure their self-worth by the thickness of their wallet, don't judge others by their income, and especially don't let themselves become a hostage to their assets. Such a person may have much but still live as if they have enough. They may lose but not lose their way. And most importantly, they know how to redefine success for themselves instead of borrowing it from someone else's leaderboard. I once met such a person. He was a retired investor living in a modest wooden house by a lake. He used to work in towering glass buildings, but now spent his time reading books, kayaking, gardening, and chatting with strangers. I asked, "Don't you miss the market?" He smiled. "The market doesn't miss me." He wasn't bitter, simply no longer clinging to what once defined him. He recounted that for years, he thought every percentage point of growth in his account was proof of his intelligence, his correctness. But then one day he realized, if I let those numbers define me, they would steal my soul. And that's what many investors never learn. You don't need to beat the market to be successful. You just need to not let the market beat your ego. I know people who check their investment accounts at least 12 times a day. Not because it's necessary, but as a ritual, like a gambler turning over a new card. If it rises, they're happy for 15 minutes. If it drops, they're sad all afternoon. Their entire inner world is tied to a number they don't control, and at some point, they lose a very important ability, the ability to live without knowing if the market is green or red today. Perhaps the ideal investor is not the best, but the freest. The one who is not swayed by turbulent waves, not enticed by promises of quick wins, not controlled by the end-of-day score. That person can sit still, hold cash if needed, wait patiently like an artisan, not out of laziness, but out of understanding. He understands that every transaction is a declaration of belief, that investing is not a sporadic act but a rhythm of life, a continuous process between understanding and letting go. He also understands that every dollar he invests is a part of his life energy, and no expected profit is worth trading his entire life just to sit in front of a screen, living through fleeting virtual values. If there's a final definition of wealth I could agree with, it's this: you are rich when you are no longer obsessed with becoming richer. You are rich when you don't have to do things you hate just to maintain a lifestyle you're no longer interested in. You are rich when you can say no to contracts, to invitations, to temptations. You are rich when you can listen to yourself and hear something pure. The last thing I want to say is not advice, because advice often becomes stale platitudes. I just want to leave you with an image. The image of you, at some moment in your life, standing at a crossroads of two paths. One path leads to where others praise you, and one path leads to where you truly know who you are. These two paths don't always overlap. Sometimes they intersect, sometimes they are completely opposite. And it is at that intersection that you must choose. Do you want to be rich, but by whose definition? I once saw a person leave Wall Street at the peak of his career, not because of failure, but because he was too tired of always having to play the role of the all-knowing expert. He moved to a rural area, living among people who had no idea who he was. He opened a small bookstore, opened every morning, closed every evening. Once I asked, "Do you feel it was a waste?" He smiled and said slowly, "In the past, I worked to be called smart. Now I just want to do what makes me feel lighthearted." In the world of investing, where everything is measured by returns, performance, gross profit, the most overlooked thing is lightheartedness. And that's what I want you to remember. You don't need to prove you're smarter than the market, don't need to win every argument, don't need to try to run faster than the person next to you. You just need to be honest with yourself, because ultimately, the real enemy in investing is not the market, but the lack of clarity within yourself. If you know what you truly want, not because society taught you, but because you genuinely find it worth living for, then every financial decision will become simpler. Not easy, but simple. You'll know when enough is enough, when to retreat, when to be patient, and when to say that money cannot buy what I'm pursuing. And perhaps, having come full circle from the desire to get rich, to understanding the nature of the market, then touching the brink of collapse, and returning to the question of why, you will realize that this book is not about money. It's about you and the strange journey of a person seeking themselves through a game that everyone thought was just about numbers. I don't know where you will go from here, but I hope somewhere among these lines, you will encounter a moment of silence where you don't need to answer anything, just see yourself a little clearer. And if that happens, then perhaps you are richer than anyone I've met on Wall Street. We have just completed a journey not simply about money, but about self. Lemon Game doesn't teach you how to get rich. It places you before a mirror, reflecting not your bank account, but how you define value, insecurity, fear, and even the lust for life. If you have listened up to this point, it means you don't just care about stock prices, but also about yourself, seriously, openly, and perhaps with deep introspection. I thank you. Not for your patience, but for your courage to go to the very end of a question. Am I living authentically or just playing a game someone else set up? I don't expect you to leave this book with new beliefs. I only hope you leave with a sharpened sense of skepticism. Skepticism towards things that seem immutable, towards the voice that demands success, towards a lifestyle tied to charts and valuations. Because sometimes, it is precisely those who know how to be skeptical who live the most profoundly. If you have any thoughts, please leave a comment. Not to agree or disagree, but to start a real, unvarnished, non-judgmental dialogue about money, about people, about the paradoxes no one teaches you how to live with. And if there's any book that has ever made you stop, made you feel turned inside out, made you unable to recount it without a slight tremor, please suggest it. I will read it, and if it moves me enough, I will tell others about it, just as I have just done for you. Now goodbye and see you again.